another Golden V podcast Facebook Live, streaming live to our YouTube channel, talking with our friend Giulio Caravatta, who graciously returns for his second Lions updates with us this season, live from his car at Lions practice. So we got to get right into this, Giulio. What's the scoop out there today? Because this is an awesome opportunity to get some info from you.
Yeah, no, not much. I think everything that's out there is pretty much what's going on. Vernon is not participating in practice. He is in a uniform, like a jersey, and no helmet though. He is just walking around following the quarterbacks and the offense. So it looks like Jake Dolagala, I think, will start this week, and then Chase Bryce, who's also taking a number of reps, is also going to be available. So really, this is going to be Jake's opportunity to really kind of showcase his skill and really kind of go on the road and get a big W for this team. I think that badly needs it after two subpar performances offensively.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about that too. I know we mentioned that off the air. Those two subpar performances really bottomed out, and I didn't have a chance to see the game even though I PBR'd it. I mean, I looked at all the pregame notes, I looked at the depth chart, and a 25-0 loss to a Winnipeg Blue Bombers team who, to me, might be past its prime at 2-6 before this game.
Yeah.
And to get shut out in Winnipeg.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. Okay, one, I'll say you're right. Like, the Winnipeg is not the same team that it has been over the last few years, like as far as dominant. But they're still very good. And I think that's one of the things that overall in the West Division, and now, you can say that right across the board, probably in the East as well. Like, that's why you see so many close games, right? Like, they come down to, 5 or 6 plays in a game, and that's the difference between winning and losing. So the margin is not very, big as far as, the teams and their ability and their talent. So the one thing that, that I'll say about the last couple of weeks, though, and this is something that happens, and it's a little bit of, and it's not, I'm not talking about the X's and O's. I'm talking about like a mentality, about a psyche that you have going into a game. But when you're winning the way the Lions were winning, like they were 5-1, you're going to Calgary, you're playing a team that is, who's 2-3, and all of a sudden, they're playing with a level of desperation because they know how big a game it is. And it's that little bit of like that desperation, that mentality of playing, that giving a little bit more. And sometimes, and not saying that the Lions weren't trying. I don't want it to come across like that, but it's just that little bit of psyche that sometimes, like when you're desperate and you're playing with your back against the wall, you have a tendency to play with a little bit more. There's just a little bit more that you're giving. And I think that's one of the things too that happened to them in Winnipeg, was that Winnipeg, with the way their season is going, they knew how big a game this was. This was massive for them. If they lose that game, they're going to put themselves way out of it. But if they win, they're right back into the mix, right? So now all of a sudden they see it as, now they're 3-6. They've got a bye week this week, and they play the Lions again. Now, if they somehow find a way to win against the Lions, now you're only one game back. And as much as they've have taken a lot of criticism for being not very good to this point, they're right back in the mix. So again, I think that plays into it a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I know when I first saw the Vernon Adams thing, I'd seen some of his performances, and I went to the Saskatchewan game at BC Place, and he had some struggles, and then I watched the Calgary game. Something wasn't right. And I think my question to you is, there's the initial horror of like, he's going to be out for a long time. We're in a lot of trouble. And then his injury status gets updated this week with Rick Campbell's, giving a little bit in a press conference, and he's out, but it's only week to week.
Week to week. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's the best case scenario for the Lions. Like, and here's the other part, like, and we've talked about this before. It's a long year. Right. Yeah. It's a long year. And what ends up happening is that, you go through these ebbs and flows of a season, but you got to remember that, the defense gets paid too. Like, the defensive coaches get paid too. And like from a scouting standpoint, they start to understand maybe what you're trying to do and how to maybe attack you a little bit differently and what to try to take away. There's always that chess match of trying to be one up on the other team. And so in Calgary's case, in Winnipeg's case, especially too, the way that their defense played, they seemed like they were one step ahead of the Lions. So now it's up to Jordan McSimic and the rest of the coaching staff to watch the film. You be critical of what you did and what you didn't do. And then you say to yourself, okay, how do we improve ourselves? And that is again the ebb and flow of a season. That's what happens. You're gonna have these, and they for most championship teams, they are a good thing to go through because it forces you into identifying what maybe you're doing or what a weakness you may have, or any of those things that happen during the course of a year, right? You want a little bit of adversity. You want to be able to climb yourself through this stuff. So, I just think that it's, the next few games are very, very critical for this team and how they respond. And now, especially too, with an injury to starting quarterback, it's a big deal.
It is, right? Because when you look at it, maybe people are a little too excited at 5-1, and we're starting to overhype things a bit, right? Because like a team is 5-3 in the CFL season, 8 games into an 18-game season. That's not a shameful record, right?
No,
to me,
no,
right? It's not a shameful record. I haven't looked at their offensive and defensive breakdowns in terms of points for and points allowed, but 5-3 is not where you go, and they've only had the one bye, right? Where you go, let's start to write this team off, or they're not good.
No, they're far from that. This is a good football team, and I don't have to say, like, their defense was outstanding in Winnipeg. They were on the field for over 40 minutes, and like they played very, very well. Like I think, what did they hold them to 6 field goals or something like that? Yeah, it was 6 field goals. So the thing about it is, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I don't panic in these kinds of scenarios. I actually think during the course of a year, if you're a good team, a great team, a championship team, that you're going to go through these kinds of scenarios, and how you respond is really a good indicator of the kind of character that your team's made of. So I just think that Rick Campbell, although it's frustrating when you go through these kinds of scenarios, it also is going to tell you, what you're good at, what you're not good at, and it forces you to make adjustments because you're not good enough in a certain spot. So that's all part of the season and how it kind of goes. So I've seen a lot of teams over the years that dominate through the regular season, and they get to the playoffs and don't win. Why? Right? Like I find it's more the team that goes through a lot of adversity, that fights and claws and finds a way to get through, that usually ends up on top. So and there's been many examples of that.
Yeah, because like, do you think anybody's going to remember, say we make it to the Grey Cup this year and we're hosting it, or we win the Grey Cup this year? Do you think anybody's going to remember an 0-2 stretch?
No, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, they're not.
Exactly right. No one's going to remember this little blip, or, if it becomes a real issue, they're going to remember it. But if the Lions are able to find a way to win on Sunday and then come home and play Winnipeg and play well and all those kinds of things, and then everything's disappeared. Right. So it's funny how it all works out.
Yeah, let's shift gears a little bit, because I mentioned this a note off the air and I shared it in our chat. You can't see it, but people who are watching can see it. But it's kind of important to review Jake Dolgala, because I remember Jake playing last year, playing against the Lions, because I was at the Saskatchewan games. So I saw him play at quarterback, and I thought it was an interesting move when they picked him up in the offseason. And I said to myself, I said, okay, Dane Evans retired. I'm like, okay, so you need a second string quarterback. Who are you going to get? And you pick up Jake Dolgala. I was just looking at some of his numbers here. Almost 2,700 yards, 11 touchdowns, lost to the Lions in week 17, throwing a...
how many yards did he throw? He threw for over 400 yards in that game, didn't he?
Yeah, I did. 409 yards in a week 17 loss to BC on September the 29th. And so when I saw the Lions picked him up, I was like, oh, that's an interesting move. What are your thoughts on that? Because I remember watching him play and thinking, okay, he's a decent quarterback, Obviously, Saskatchewan committed heavily to Trevor Harris last year, like they did again this year.
Yeah,
Harris is not there again, and then the Lions snagged Dolgala. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, like Jake, I think impressed them in the games that he played against them.
Yeah.
And again, like, that I think when you're searching for kind of a quarterback with a little bit of experience, like losing Dane Evans and his experience was a big
Yeah.
blow for them, right? Like,
Yeah.
in normal circumstances, Dane would have come back, but he decided to move on from football and get on with the other life that he's going to lead after football. So, you got to go out. So, I know that there was a couple of options that they had, but they ended up getting Jake, and he's a guy that's started he started, I think, 10 games in the CFL. And so he played on a team in Saskatchewan that struggled. And but I mean, he did show that he can throw the football. So, I mean, these are the scenarios for these young quarterbacks now that you have to be able to rise up and shine, right? You've been in the league about 3 or 4 years. You've had opportunities to start. You get this opportunity. You got to prove yourself, right? You got to prove that this is why they brought you in and gave you the money. So it's one of those things that, there's a lot riding for him on this, right? He's got to prove not only to himself, but to his teammates and the rest of the league that he can play at this level. So these are the kinds of opportunities that you got to take advantage of.
Yeah. And it's an interesting scenario, right? Because this will make you laugh, because you don't have to be hiding under a rock to see all the Nathan Rourke stuff that's been floating around.
Yeah.
Right. After the latest release in the NFL and then signing with Atlanta Falcons. Right. But, you look at Lions Facebook groups or just social media or just people's opinion or even people in the local media. Immediately Vernon goes down and everybody switches back to wanting to bring Nathan back. But I don't think that's a practical scenario.
Yeah.
In any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. No, I think too is like, if it was me, and I always think to myself, like, these guys aren't any different than you and I, right? Like they're like, how would you feel? Right? Like if it was you, right? It would, I'm sure, like, you probably out front would say, oh yeah, no, it doesn't bother me. But I think a little bit, it would probably bug you a little bit, wouldn't it? Like, so, it's a part of the business. It happens. And, maybe it was something that was kind of hanging over his head. I don't know. But, again, it's all part of the flow of a season and the flow of a career. And Vernon, I think, has proven over the years that he's been able to fight through a lot of adversity and come up on top. And, he's definitely going to be a guy that this team, they need him, right? He's having an MOP type season, and they need him to be a difference maker. And he has been up to this point. So I'm sure that he's itching to get back. I know there's a little bit of talk about him potentially being back for the Winnipeg game. And let's hope that happens.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit before we wrap up, because I want to talk about this Elks preview with the Edmonton Elks this weekend. Mm-hmm. And obviously the Elks, the 0-7 team in the CFL, the only team without a win, goes into Saskatchewan and beats Saskatchewan in Saskatchewan. Probably shocking Saskatchewan a little bit, the way the Winnipeg Blue Bombers shocked us this week, given where BC and Saskatchewan are fighting it out for first in the West.
Yeah. Well, I think probably the one big thing too, like, and again, like you look at Saskatchewan, like up to this point, they were averaging 50 yards against rushing, right around there. And they gave up 270 yards of rushing. It happens. Like in the course of a year, it happens. Even to the best teams, you're gonna lose. And it's always the reaction, right? What comes of it. So now, like you got a scenario too in Edmonton where, they've been close. It's not like Edmonton's getting blown out of every game. But Edmonton's had a lot of bad luck. They've had 3 walk-off games where they've kicked field goals to the visiting teams kicked field goals to win a game. Yeah. And the Lions did it against them, did they not? If I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. So, getting Trey Ford, obviously it's given them a spark. He does a lot of things really well. His ability to move around, I think what it does is it really helps their running game, and it really showcased that, because you got to worry about him. And so you can't keep crashing down on the line of scrimmage. And so you need to be able to account for him, and that spreads out that defense and makes them a little bit more dangerous. So now it's going to be interesting to see how the Lions defensively attack that. And I'm sure Ryan Phillips will try to come up with a good plan to do that.
Yeah, and just a side note on Edmonton, you know this, and anybody following the CFL knows this. Like, look at all the changes they've made in terms of Chris Jones leaving, and then obviously, where
Yeah.
Simon comes in, and so does Jarius Jackson. Lions fans will remember him well for his time here as both a player and a coach. So there's an interesting storyline in Edmonton. I wonder what guys like G-Roy and Jarius can do to that Elks team, even if they don't make the playoffs this season, but at least make some positive changes, right?
Yeah, it's going to be, they're going to have to turn everything around in order for them to, I think to get renewed as the coach and general manager. Like I hope that they do, because I really like G-Roy and I really like Jarius. But I think at the same time, like if they can't run the table and get themselves into the playoffs and make some noise in the playoffs, right? It's you have to think in Edmonton that they're gonna want to start fresh with somebody new, and I don't know if that's the case. And there's still a lot of season left, and given how they played against Saskatchewan on the road, I'm sure they're pretty excited about playing in front of their home fans and finally winning at home as well, because that's something that has not happened very often over the last 3 or 4 years. So, there's a lot riding on this game for both teams, and I don't think anybody that watches realizes that we're I know it's in August, and everyone always says, "Oh, Labor Day is when the season really starts," but you can give yourself a lot of cushion by playing well at this time of the year. And the Lions are in a situation now. They're going to play a Western team this week, again next week, and then now they're going to play back to back against Ottawa. Then you're playing Montreal, you're playing Toronto. So it doesn't get any easier for anybody. It doesn't. So it should be a lot of fun as a fan to watch.
Yeah, it is. And okay, we're going to wrap it up there. Thanks, Giulio, for joining us today.
No problem,
Appreciate
buddy.
everybody.